just the hollow beep of a blocked line. Jason had promised he would be there. He had told her everything would be fine, that they'd get through it together, but when she told him the baby was coming, he had gone silent. Hours later, with her bag packed and her body racked with pain, he was still unreachable. Now, the truth hit her harder than the contractions. He had shut her out. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand, eyes full of protocol but empty of warmth. "You'll need to settle the emergency deposit before we can prep your room," she said softly, almost apologetically. Mia stared at her, dazed. I don't have that kind of money right now," she murmured. Her voice cracked under the weight of humiliation and fear. Behind her, footsteps echoed on the polished floor. A man's voice, deep, measured, cut through the moment. "She's with me." Mia turned slowly. The man who stepped forward was a stranger. Impeccably dressed in a tailored wool coat, his salt and pepper beard trimmed with precision, eyes unreadable but calm. He didn't look at her at first. He simply slid his card across the desk and nodded to the nurse. Then he turned to Mia. "You don't have to do this alone." She stared at him, heart pounding, not just from the labor, but from the impossible question now forming in her mind. Who was this man? The hospital lights buzzed faintly above, their sterile glow doing little to warm the ice that clung to Mia's chest. She followed the man down the corridor, her steps slow and unsteady. Every few seconds, her hand flew to her belly as another contraction twisted through her. Nurses scurried past them, oblivious to the odd pair, a woman on the edge of motherhood and a mysterious man who hadn't even asked her name. When they reached the elevator, he finally turned to her. "You need to lie down. You're in active labor," he said calmly, pressing the button for the maternity floor. She nodded, breath shallow. Why did you pay for me?" His eyes met hers then, calm, steady. "Because no one should be abandoned in a moment like this." The doors slid open. Inside the private birthing suite, Mia was gently helped onto the bed. Nurses took over, checking her vitals, offering reassurance, prepping for delivery. The man stood silently by the window, watching the rain trickle down the glass like a slow-moving stream of time. He looked completely out of place, like he belonged in a boardroom, not a delivery room. Finally, when the room quieted and Mia had a moment to catch her breath, she asked, "Do I know you?" He shook his head. "No. But I know what it feels like to be left behind, and I promised myself years ago that if I ever had the chance to stop someone from feeling what I felt, I would." Mia looked at him, this enigma of a man, and for the first time since the contractions began, she felt something close to safety. Not trust, not yet, but maybe hope. Outside, the storm eased, but inside, the real storm had only begun. When the nurse returned with a clipboard and a soft smile, she turned to Mia. "We'll need your full name, emergency contact, and the father's information for the birth certificate," she said gently, as if she already sensed the tension woven into the silence of the room. Mia hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the pen. "My name's Mia Torres," she said softly, scribbling it down. Then came the second line, emergency contact. She paused. For a fleeting moment she considered writing his name. The man she loved. The one who once placed his hand over her growing belly and whispered promises. The one who now ignored her calls, blocked her number, and disappeared when life needed him most. Her pen hovered. "I'll be her emergency contact," the man at the window said without hesitation. The nurse blinked, surprised, but nodded, and began to take his information. Mia looked up at him, confused. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," he replied simply. "I just need you to be okay." As the nurse exited, Mia's voice cracked. His name's still on everything, the forms, the plans, the crib in the apartment. She trailed off, emotion choking the words. The man stepped closer but didn't touch her. He simply stood near, steady like a lighthouse during a violent tide. He made a choice, he said, his voice calm but firm, but now you get to make yours. And who are you to say that? She asked, blinking back tears. He finally smiled, just a little. A man who knows what it's like to lose everything and still be given one more chance to do something right. Mia turned her face toward the ceiling, breathing through another contraction. Somehow, his words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like truth. The hospital room had grown quieter, the kind of silence that buzzes with too many unspoken questions. Outside the window, the night had begun to fall, cloaking the world in soft shadows. Inside, the fluorescent light hummed above Mia's head, casting a pale glow over her tired features. She shifted slightly, adjusting the thin hospital blanket over her legs, then turned toward the man still seated nearby. Calm, composed, strangely familiar now despite being a stranger. She studied him, the tailored coat, the clean lines of his shirt, shoes that had clearly never touched dirt. And yet, here he was, sitting in a hospital chair like he belonged nowhere else. "I don't even know your name," Mia finally said, her voice hoarse. He smiled faintly without arrogance. "Thomas." "Just Thomas?" He shrugged gently. "It's enough for now." Mia looked away, her lips pressing together. "You shouldn't be here. You don't owe me anything." "You're right," he replied. "I don't owe you anything, but I've been in rooms like this before, too many times. Rooms where someone is alone, scared, thinking nobody will show up. And I promised myself, if I ever had a chance to be the person who does show up, I wouldn't hesitate." Her chest tightened, not from the contraction this time, but from the weight of his words. Mia had spent months building a wall around herself, convinced that people only took, left, or disappeared. Yet this man, with nothing to gain, sat beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm not looking for a savior," she said quietly. "Good," he answered, "because I'm not one." He stood, adjusted his coat, and glanced at the door. "But I am someone who knows the value of being there when it matters." As he walked out to let the nurse in, Mia whispered under her breath, almost involuntarily, "Thank you, Thomas." He didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders pause, just long enough to know he heard. The nurse, brisk and efficient, entered the room a few minutes after Thomas stepped out. She carried a clipboard and wore a polite but hurried smile, the kind hospital staff often gave to women like Mia. Women with no insurance, women who looked like they didn't belong in a private maternity suite. As she checked Mia's vitals, she tried to keep her tone neutral. "So, the front desk mentioned you were brought in by a man?" Mia nodded slowly. "Yeah, his name's Thomas." "Are you family?" Mia hesitated. "No, he's just someone who helped." The nurse's lips pressed into a line, not unkind but cautious. "Well, just so you know, this room isn't covered under general emergency admittance. It's technically private, and according to records, you don't have... She can't afford this room." A male voice interrupted from the doorway. Thomas had returned. He stepped inside calmly, his presence effortlessly shifting the energy in the room. Even the nurse straightened instinctively. "But I can," he continued, pulling a sleek wallet from his coat, "and she's staying right here." The nurse blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, that's not..." He handed her a black card. Not flashy, just definitive. The kind of card that didn't get questioned. "I'll take care of everything," he said. Mia sat up a little. "Thomas, you don't have to..." "I know," he replied gently. "That's why I'm doing it." There was no performance in his gesture, no demand for gratitude. Just a quiet conviction that kindness didn't have to come with conditions. After the nurse left to process the payment, Mia looked at him, conflicted. Why are you doing this?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window, gazing out at the fading light beyond the city skyline. "Because no one did it for my mother," he said at last, his voice softer now. "She died alone, scared. I was too young to help her, but I'm not anymore." Mia felt the words settle deep inside her, heavy and warm. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt seen. And in the stillness of that hospital room, something unspoken connected them. Two strangers, bound not by fate, but by the shared ache of what they'd lost. Later that evening, as the fluorescent lights hummed softly and the monitors near Mia's bed blinked in steady rhythm, two hospital administrators walked into the maternity wing. One of them, a woman in a pressed navy suit, reviewed a folder in her hand while whispering with her colleague. They didn't knock before stepping into Mia's room. "Miss Collins?" the woman asked coolly. Mia looked up, startled. Thomas was sitting beside her, quietly reading something on his phone. He stood the moment they entered. "I'm Judith Hale," the woman continued, "head of billing services. I'm here regarding your stay." Thomas stepped forward calmly. "I've already handled the charges." "Yes, we received a payment authorization," Judith said, not looking at him. Her tone wasn't confrontational, just coldly professional. "But this hospital reserves its premium maternity suites for patients who meet certain criteria: insurance verification, family access, security clearance." Mia flinched at the word criteria. It always felt like a polite way of saying people like you. Judith continued, "We have to be careful who we admit to this floor. Other patients might feel uncomfortable." Thomas's jaw tensed, but his voice remained level. "Are you suggesting she doesn't deserve the same care because she's poor?" "I'm suggesting," Judith replied, "that we don't typically allow walk-ins to occupy our private rooms, especially not those without proper background verification." "She's not a walk-in, she's a woman in labor," Thomas said, his voice now firm. "And she's under my care. If there's an issue with policy, I'll discuss it with your board, or perhaps with the press." Judith hesitated. The room suddenly felt tighter. "Very well," she finally said, "but this stay will be noted as an exception." As she left, Thomas turned to Mia. She looked mortified, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the hospital sheet. "I don't want to cause trouble," she whispered. "Maybe I should just go." But Thomas crouched beside her again, his eyes unwavering. "You're not going anywhere, Mia. Let them look at us however they want. I see you. I see your worth." Her eyes welled up, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being defended, protected. In that moment, surrounded by clinical walls and institutional indifference, Mia felt something stir in her that she hadn't known in years: hope. The hours passed slowly. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air, and the rhythmic beeping of monitors marked each second like a ticking clock. Mia lay back on the adjustable bed, her eyes fluttering between exhaustion and anxiety. Contractions were now regular, intense, her body taking charge of a destiny she hadn't planned. Thomas sat beside her, unusually silent. His fingers rested on the arm of the chair, but his eyes never left her face. He didn't touch her unless she reached for him, a quiet respectfulness that made his presence all the more comforting. A nurse came in around midnight, young, kind-eyed, but visibly nervous. "We're a bit short-staffed tonight," she whispered, checking the monitor, "but I'll be right outside if you need anything." Mia gave a faint nod. She felt like a child being left alone in a storm. After the nurse left, another contraction hit, harder than before. Mia cried out, curling her body slightly, gripping the rail of the bed. Thomas was beside her in an instant, offering his hand. "Breathe," he said gently, "like they showed you in the classes." "I didn't go to any," she gasped between breaths. I didn't think I'd have anyone to go with. He nodded slowly. Then we'll figure it out together. Through clenched teeth and tears, she let his voice guide her through the pain. The moment passed, and she fell back into the pillows, drenched in sweat, but more emotionally shaken than physically. I thought he'd be here, she muttered, eyes fixed on the ceiling. I didn't even care if we were together. I just wanted him to see his daughter. Thomas didn't speak. He didn't say what was easy or expected. He simply reached for a cool cloth and dabbed her forehead. His hands were steady, as if he'd done this 100 times. Do you want me to stay through the delivery? He asked quietly. Mia's answer came without hesitation. Yes. And in that one word, that small but seismic shift, she stopped seeing him as a stranger who paid her bill. He had become something else entirely, a witness to her pain, her strength, her beginning. The early morning light seeped in through the small hospital window, casting a golden hue on the tiled floor. Mia lay still, half asleep, half bracing for the next contraction. Her hand was still loosely wrapped around Thomas's fingers. He hadn't moved all night. He hadn't gone for coffee. He hadn't stepped out to answer calls. He hadn't so much as gone to the bathroom. He was just there. It struck the nurses as strange at first. Who was this man who sat so still, so quietly attentive, beside a woman who wasn't his wife or girlfriend? They whispered in passing, speculating, but none dared to interrupt. There was something sacred in the way he looked at her, not romantic, not possessive, but profoundly present. Mia blinked groggily, her voice raspy. "You're still here?" Thomas chuckled softly. "Where else would I be?" She looked at him long and hard, the dark circles under his eyes, the unshaven stubble, the expensive coat still draped over the visitor's chair. "You don't owe me anything, you know." "I'm aware," he replied, not unkindly, "but that doesn't mean I'll walk away." A nurse peeked in. "We're ready to prep the room for delivery. It's time." Mia's breath caught. Her heart pounded. All the emotion she had pushed aside for hours came rushing back. Fear, doubt, loneliness. She wasn't ready. Not for the pain. Not for the moment after. "Do you want someone to call the father?" the nurse asked. "No," Mia said firmly, before she could even think. Then she turned to Thomas, her voice trembling. "Will you be there? In the room?" He stood without hesitation. "If you want me, I'll be there." And just like that, he walked beside her as they wheeled her to the delivery room. No last name shared, no history between them. But in every way that mattered, she wasn't alone anymore. And Thomas? He had no idea why he felt so drawn to her, only that he couldn't walk away from a woman brave enough to fight alone and strong enough to let someone in. The delivery room was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Mia gripped the side rails of the hospital bed as a contraction rippled through her body. Her jaw clenched, her eyes shut tight. Sweat dripped down her temples. Thomas stood beside her, masked, gloved, but completely out of place. A man from boardrooms and black tie events now holding her hand as she brought life into the world. And yet, he didn't flinch. He didn't panic. His hand never let go of hers. "You're doing great," he whispered as her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream, to curse the pain, the fear, and every single person who had abandoned her. But instead, she focused on the sound of his voice, steady, calm, utterly grounding. His presence felt like an anchor in a storm that had nearly broken her. The doctor gave the signal. "One more big push, Mia." Tears welled up as she obeyed, letting out a guttural cry. The room blurred. And then, as she said, it was over. The cry of a newborn filled the space, piercing and perfect. Mia collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing, not from pain anymore, from relief, from disbelief, from love. A nurse brought the tiny swaddled baby to her arms. Mia stared down at the child, her heart unraveling in ways she never imagined. The baby's eyes opened, dark and curious, and Mia gasped. "She's beautiful," Thomas said softly, leaning over her shoulder. Mia looked up at him, voice raw. "Do you want to hold her?" He hesitated, then gently accepted the fragile bundle, cradling the baby as if he'd done it 100 times. She was impossibly small in his arms, but he looked at her with a mix of wonder and awe. "Have you thought of a name?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Mia nodded. "Hope." He looked back down at the baby. "Hope," he repeated. "Fitting. She's already changed everything." And in that moment, surrounded by hospital walls, under flickering lights, in the least likely of circumstances, something began that none of them could explain. A story of redemption, healing, and a bond deeper than blood. Because sometimes, family chooses you. The maternity room was dimly lit in the early morning. Outside, the city was slowly waking up. Distant traffic, a siren somewhere far away, birds chirping near the window. Inside, all was quiet, save for the soft breaths of a newborn sleeping in Mia's arms. Thomas sat in a chair nearby, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, watching them. He hadn't said much since the delivery, and neither had she. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was full of things unspoken, of emotions too large for language, of a kind of peace that only comes after a storm. Mia gently adjusted the blanket over the baby's head and whispered, "She slept on my heartbeat last night," as if it was the only sound she ever trusted. Thomas smiled faintly, eyes still locked on them. "Probably was." Mia glanced at him. "Why did you stay?" His answer came without pause. "Because I needed to." She searched his face, not for lies, she knew there were none, but for meaning, for intention, for what came next. "I'm not used to people staying," she murmured. "Most only show up when it's convenient." He nodded, his voice low. "I've been one of those people." She looked at him for a long time. "So, are you planning to keep showing up?" Thomas leaned back in the chair. "Mia, I don't know how to fix everything. I don't even know how I ended up here. But I do know that when I saw you struggling to pay that hospital bill, something in me clicked. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was timing, but holding her, it's not about pity. It's about wanting to be part of something that finally feels real." The baby stirred slightly, curling her tiny fingers against Mia's chest. "I'm not asking you to save me," Mia said carefully. "I've been saving myself for a long time." He nodded again. "Then maybe I'm just asking to walk beside you." A long pause. Then Mia whispered, "That would be new." Thomas stood, walked over, and sat gently on the edge of her bed. He looked at the baby, then at Mia. "Let's make something new then." In that stillness, no signatures, no promises, something unshakable was beginning to take root. Later that morning, the nurse walked in with a gentle knock and a clipboard pressed against her chest. "Hi, Mia," she said softly, eyes drifting to the sleeping baby. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need to finalize a few things. Birth certificate, emergency contacts, you know, all the official stuff." Mia nodded, still cradling her daughter, her eyes sleepy but alert. "Of course." Thomas instinctively stood from the chair, unsure if he should step out, but the nurse glanced at him. "You're the father?" He hesitated. Mia didn't speak. For a few seconds, the air in the room held its breath. Then Thomas said, steady and low, "No, but I'd like to help if I can." The nurse nodded respectfully, sensing the delicacy, and handed the form to Mia. There was a line for the baby's full name, another for father's name. Mia stared at the blank lines. She hadn't thought about names beyond what sounded pretty, but now it felt like naming a future, not just a child. I think "I'll call her Ilara," she said at last. "It means light. That's what she is." The nurse smiled. Beautiful choice. Then came the line she'd been avoiding. Mia stared at it for a while, then looked at Thomas. "I don't expect anything," she said plainly, "but I also won't lie for him." Thomas walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "Put what's honest." "That's all anyone can ask," Mia nodded. She left the space blank, not out of shame, but truth. This child didn't need shadows, only light. As the nurse moved on to the next form, Thomas turned and asked, "What about your last name? You keeping it?" Mia smirked. "I earned it. I'm not giving it up." When the nurse left, the room was quiet again. Mia looked at Thomas, a subtle challenge in her gaze. "You're still here," he nodded. "You don't scare me." "I should." Thomas stepped closer, not smiling, just steady. "Maybe, but you won't." Outside, the sun poured in a little brighter, and Ilara stirred in her mother's arms. A small yawn, a blink, then sleep again. Life was already beginning, and choices were being made, quietly, firmly, and without permission. That evening, the hallway lights flickered softly through the glass panel in the hospital door. The cafeteria food tray sat untouched. Ilara was finally asleep in the clear